Black, black. No, there's no sugar. Café negro sin azúcar. Yes, it is 3 a.m. here in Melbourne, Victoria, in the middle of winter. It is black. It's just like my coffee outside. It's black, it's wet, except it's cold. And there's nothing worse than cold coffee. So, yeah, sweet. Yeah, I've got friends that if their coffee will go cold, they heat it up in the microwave, but that is just so gross. If I get down to half a cup of coffee and I forget it or something and it goes cold, no, it's got to be a new fresh cup of coffee. Yeah, but it's not pleasant. I've done that. It's not pleasant. Yeah, yeah. Back like as a young teenager or whatever. Um, Actually, when I first joined the Navy, because I started in the Navy as an apprentice, so I joined at the minimum age, which is 15 and three quarters, and yeah, so as an apprentice, it's the youngest way you can join the Navy, and your first 2 years of service, you're at like a training base, learning your trade for the first 2 years, and then the second 2 years you finish your apprenticeship on a ship. And so I was like electrical weapons. So I was a weapons technician, worked on guided missile systems, gun turrets, torpedo tubes, that kind of thing. Um, yeah, exactly. And when you're at sea, because back then I was like white and two sugars, and that was like standard. It was like a Navy issue, if you like. Someone says, "You want a coffee?" It's like, "Yep." No one asked, "How do you take it?" You just got white and two. That was how you got it. But on a ship at sea, vitlers or the store people, they don't keep watches. So if you're up at anywhere from midnight till 6 in the morning, you finish the guts at 4 a.m. or you've done something like that, and you go to coffee, there might be milk, but there'll be no sugar. Or there might be sugar, but there's no milk yeah, in the cafe. So it just, for convenience, I started taking black with no sugar. And that's instant. We're talking instant. We're talking on a ship at sea. Um, yeah. So I just got onto the black no sugar from convenience, and I really didn't get my first taste of like real coffee until I moved to Melbourne. Like when I grew up, growing up as a kid, like the jar of Nescafe, that was coffee. I didn't know anything different. And the first time I had like because like, especially like in America, I don't know what it's actually like, but what we get to see here, movies and TV shows, like with the diner sort of thing. You go in, do you want a coffee? And they've got this pot that sits on a hot plate, and they just pour it from that, from like a drip filter type thing. Um, I don't know if that's standard or if it's just what we see here on the movies. But in Australia, when you go to a cafe for a coffee, it's like espresso style. Every coffee is made fresh from the machine. They press the grinded beans into the cup. They put it in. They run the hot steamed water through it. Um, yeah, and that's like, wow, this is like as a kid growing up, all I knew was instant. Yes, yes, yeah, yeah. For the quick and go, which is I'm sort of ready to grab one now as well, another one now. Um, we have these coffee bags that Robert Tim's is like the main brand we have here, and it's like a tea bag, but in the bag it's ground coffee beans, and so you just put it in your cup, pour water from the kettle or jug, and you just got to leave the bag in there for a minute or two, and you take it out, and so it's actually real coffee. Yeah, yeah. The first time I saw them, blew my mind. Yeah, and if I'm traveling, I just jam them in my backpack because wherever I go, I thought I'm probably not going to get real coffee on the road type thing, or um, if I'm especially from couch surfing while traveling or something like that. Rather than wake up in the morning and go, "You want a coffee?" It's like, yes. And they go, "1 teaspoon or two." And I go, "No." Wow. It, in our MREs, we used to get like a toothpaste tube that was coffee, milk, and sugar all together. And so you just squeeze some of that into your cup and add boiling water. But quite often we just sit there sucking it out of the tube. Yeah, just add water from the kettle and just leave it for a minute or two. Right. It's to paraphrase a completely different meaning. It is true that once you go black, you can't go back. Yeah. Hmm. One thing we have here too, in like culture wise, we have so many things here that are like it's universal, but everywhere you go, they call it something different. And if I'm traveling anywhere international, the type of coffee that I like, I've got to ask for cafe americano, right? Um, which is yeah, which is yeah, which is going to get you something like this, right? But made fresh, not with a bag. Um, or if you want a little hit, so you just go scull it down. That's an espresso. Yeah. In Australia, the espresso is called a short black, and the filled up with water, or I always ask for mine 3/4. If I'm getting a coffee, I say 3/4 because I don't want it diluted. But that's called a long black. But I've never heard of that anywhere else in the world. It's cafe americano or espresso. But yeah, here it's a short black and a long black. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. I've like had I haven't seen it for a while, but there's a few coffee shops. Melbourne, Australia has extremely rich coffee culture, um, and it's been established for a long time. And here, a coffee shop, when you go to a cafe for a coffee, it's like if you're meeting up with a friend, it's at a coffee shop always. And exception being the evening, you've gone for a beer or something like that. But personally, myself, I'm not a drinker. Um, I can do and if I do, it's usually something like bourbon or brandy, and I will sip on a shot for and it's like thinking juice for me if I'm in a creative mood, if I'm writing or blogging or something like that. But generally, I'm not a drinker, and in fact, say classically un-Australian. In summer, you go to a barbie and steak, chops, sausages, beers, and beers. I'm vegetarian, so I don't eat meat. um, I'm not a fan of the sugar, so I don't have like carbonated soft drinks or anything like that. And yeah, so not a fan of drinkers. So the coffee shop, I'm all part of that culture, and which is why Starbucks failed dismally here in Australia, in particular in Melbourne. Exactly. Yeah. Or if when I'm traveling, Starbucks is always good for one thing, especially I noticed through South America, traveling around there. Starbucks is good for one thing, and that's Wi-Fi. Yeah. If you want good, reliable Wi-Fi, which quite often you can't get it in your hotel, but everywhere you go, they have these huge signs out front, free Wi-Fi, hotels, restaurants, cafes, whatever. And you go in, they give you the password, you log in, and you're lucky if you can upload a photo to Facebook from your day's trips. Wi-Fi is really bad, but yeah, Starbucks, you go in there and it's full. It's absolutely chockers, and everyone's sitting there with the laptop open. So yeah, that's how it should be. But yeah, Wi-Fi in South America, it's a bit like the plumbing. And have you ever traveled through South America? Right. So the plumbing from when they first like started indoor plumbing and stuff like that down there, you cannot actually put toilet paper down the toilet because if you flush it, it will clog the pipes because the pipes are extremely narrow. So anywhere you go, there's a little basket to put your shitty paper in when you don't like your wife. It just goes in this basket of rubbish bin that sits there, and even at like the airport. You think, okay, at least the airport, international lounge at the airport, that they can have decent plumbing, but no, no. So, and there'll be signs anywhere they expect tourists. Do not flush toilet paper. Toilet paper goes in the bin. And their internet's a bit like that as well. It's just, it's very, very narrow bandwidth. Yeah. No. Yeah. Yeah. Bolivia was the same. Chile. I've only been to Chile, Peru, Bolivia, um, and it was standard across there. Next year, I think I've told you before, I mentioned on one of your streams, I'm off to Mexico for 12 months in January. And going to Guadalajara initially, and I've got a friend there. He's quite famous in the Anarchapulco scene as the guy who got deported from Mexico. Like he was there 7 years or something, and he was just on his way home one night on a bus, and just random immigration police check, and he discovered that immigration police are not as susceptible to bribes as your local state or federale. So yeah, he got deported from Mexico, and he's spoken at Acapulco before. He's rapped at Acapulco, so he's known. So now he's the guy that got deported from Mexico. But it was lucky for me because when he came back to Australia, like when he was trying need somewhere to stay, I said, "Oh, you can crash at mine for a couple of weeks." And it was him that got me into crypto and onto Steam, which led me to where I am today. So I'm actually quite grateful that he did get deported. But while I'm in Mexico, so you might not be, when you go there, you don't need a visa or anything. You get a 180-day tourist card. But when 180 days expires, it's apparently it's just you just go and say, I want to renew, and there's no questions asked, they'll renew it. So you can essentially get 360 days, which is a year. But while I'm over there, I'll be predominantly based out of Guadalajara. I intend to use that time to travel because I definitely want to go back to Peru. I loved Peru. Peru and Bolivia are around Lake Titicaca, modern day borders, but pre-colonial times, they were the same people. From the Inca culture around Lake Titicaca, and that's my main area of interest up in the Andes, 3,700 meters above sea level. Not quite. I think Colorado comes close, the mountains of Colorado, but yes, it's because of that altitude. It's a very laid-back culture, as you can imagine. You cannot do anything too physically exhausting. You can't run anywhere. You just got to walk and breathe deeply. The highest altitude I've been to actually was in Bolivia, Mount Chacaltaya. Walked to the summit, and that was 5,400 meters above sea level. Sorry, I don't know what that is in feet. I'm sorry. Um, okay, yeah. But La Paz in Bolivia is already like 3,800, the capital city. Whereas in Peru, at least they moved their capital city for convenience of commerce and so forth. Because Cusco, which is up in the Andes, which is where I like to go, that's where all the stuff is. That's 3,700 meters. but sometime back they moved their capital to Lima as a seaport, um, just for convenience of trade, you know, which makes a lot of sense. Yes, yeah. Um, I can't remember if I just went on a massive digression or if I actually got to the point I was going to make. I think coffee was supposed to have come into that somewhere, but I can't remember. Man, overboard. Yeah, yeah. It's same with 101. We have a general with the show I do with Matt and Geo. Um, if it's just the three of us, we'll start off with maybe what was covered in the town hall or something, and on a subject, and we just digress from there. And when we have a guest, it's the theme is behind the avatar. So it's not predominantly focused on the game itself, but on that person who's playing. So when you're battling, it's like you've got an icon there or a name, Dragon Smasher 3000, or who is this Dragon Smasher 3000? Um, so, yeah, it's the opportunity for them to talk about themselves. And yeah, we just go in all directions, like no scripts, no, we just organic chat. And I just love that format. It's sometimes I've been on done back in the DTube days, especially. I did a lot of interviews with people, and sometimes it's just more like an interrogation. An interview is just that they've got these 10 questions that they want to ask you, and if you detour too far, you get cut. And it's like it's just not fun. What is it? Hit me. Yeah. And on that, I think I actually remember where I was going. It's the fact that I'll be in Mexico for 12 months, but I'll be using the opportunity to travel. Because from Australia to South America, it's 17 hours. And I've got to fly from Melbourne to Auckland in New Zealand, then from there to Santiago in Chile, then from there up to Lima, Peru, then from there to Cusco. Um, so it's quite a fuck around if you want to go from Australia anywhere, but from Australia to South America in particular, I think it's the biggest section of ocean between two continents that we're crossing. Um, so from Mexico, a lot of places are going to be close. So I hope to use that opportunity to travel around from there. So I'll be based in Guadalajara, but it'll be more like literally a base of operations to travel to and from. Jump around, get down, yeah. Well, at the moment, my main source, I mean, my background's archaeology, which pretty much died during the pandemic. In fact, I was on a great job. I was working a job at the time in Perth, Western Australia, and from East Coast to the West Coast is like a 4-hour flight. A lot of people don't realise how big Australia actually is. Um, I mean, I don't know how many times the US fits into Australia, but Australia is really big, and we have a population of 27 million. People go like, "What?" A country, the landmass bigger than China, but a population of 27 million. And that's because if you look at a topographical map of Australia, you see most of it from the centre or around is just yellow and brown. And there's this little strip of green around the edge, which is where we all live. Um, So mostly in the desert regions, it's, I guess, like Nevada or New Mexico in down south in the States. It's just tundra. If there's something green, it's not going to grow any taller than a few inches. Um, and the water is very salty, so you can't like grow crop, you can't graze. So it's just, wasteland essentially. But yeah, it takes 4 hours to get from the east to the west coast. And I got called up for a job because I did my study in Western Australia. I moved to Melbourne about 15, 16 years ago. And I did most of my growing up in Perth. And so, yeah, this job was in Perth. Before Perth became Perth, it was called the Swan River Settlement, because Australia was only settled by the British like 200 years ago. And we don't have a huge colonial history. So my forte within archaeology is Indigenous archaeology. But this job I was sent to in Perth, it was the original cemetery from the Swan River Settlement. And like it's very rare in Australia in archaeology to actually get to work with any kind of human remains, because if you find human remains, they're Indigenous usually. And that's just a down till stop. Everything comes to a complete stop. You get the Indigenous custodians, the elders, they come in and like, so if you're a developer and you come across bones, you might as well just commit suicide, right? you're gonna be in debt for the rest of your life. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I was working there, and this is during the summer in Perth, which is 40 to 45 degrees Celsius. So it was like 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. So I'd fly to Perth, work a 12-hour day, 6 days a week, sometimes 7 days for 2 weeks, and come back to Melbourne for 2 weeks. And then the pandemic sort of came out, or scandemic, whatever you want to call it, came out of nowhere. So because it was such a big job, there were archaeologists from all over Australia. So from the developer's point of view, because a developer, they borrow a lot of money from the banks, so they need to build, sell, rent as quickly as possible. And this land, going back to the first, 150 to 180 years ago, after it was a cemetery. I mean, we're talking the first settlement of Western Australia was not productive. A whole new environment, like people didn't know how to grow food, cholera, sickness, dysentery. It almost failed. The colony almost failed. And then I think what saved Western Australia was the gold rush in Kalgoorlie, and that attracted massive numbers. And Kalgoorlie is about 600 kilometres from Perth. And this cemetery started to get used by homeless people as a camping ground. People would dig up the coffins for firewood, things like that. So it just, and back then there was no death certificate issued, no paperwork, nothing like that. And over time, it just became completely disused. It was bought in sometime 1920s or maybe later by a girls' college. And they bought all of this land, and then one day decided, hey, we need tennis courts. So this is about the 1950s or 60s by now. Yeah. So in came the bulldozers, and all of a sudden these bodies just started coming up, and I was like, oh, okay, stop. And they apparently they just poured it all back into the ground, flattened it down, and walked away whistling. And we actually found that area, just a pit full of just bones just mashed together and so forth. But we did find a number of graves that had survived intact, and the land was quite strange elevation as well. So on parts of that where rainfall or water had been, like the bone was more plant matter than it was actually bone. Where a physical anthropologist, which is essentially forensics, on site said some of these bones were like 15% bone and 75% vegetable matter. They're just whereas in the dry, flat area where completely anaerobic environments, so no bacteria or anything like that, the preservation was immaculate, right down to the flanges in the fingers, like little bones that you just don't see over any prolonged period of time. So we had some incredibly intact skeletons from that region.
That's
but
awesome.
yeah, it's just such a
you
rare
kind of both
opportunity.
ends of the extreme there. You get like some that are perfectly preserved, and then some that are not even bone anymore. That's kind of awesome. What is, out of
Yeah,
your personal archaeological work, what's the coolest thing that you have actually found or learned?
that would probably just from the experience of working on human remains, that project, absolutely. But I did a job once in Fremantle where they wanted to try and dig up the original tram tracks from um, Australia. Like every capital city around Australia had a tram network. I believe in the States you call them cable cars. Like it runs on tracks, overhead wires. It's not a train. It goes in the traffic with the cars, but it's on tracks. I
Like
think
a
you call them
trolley?
cable cars. Trolley, yes, that's it. Yeah, we call them trams.
Yep,
And
I've heard
every
that one
capital
too.
city, every capital city had a tram network that, for interests of oil barons and so forth, all got ripped up, except Melbourne. Melbourne's the only city that kept its tram network. So they wanted to find the original tram network from Perth, and we had to dig down like 1.5 meters, which is sus all by itself. I do not believe mainstream history. I have a very alternative view on history. It's something that has been hidden from us, but that's a digression. We had to dig down 1.5 meters to find this tram track that was dug up less than 100 years ago in the historical timeline. And we found like this wooden sleeper, essentially perfectly preserved compared to nothing around it, just due to the condition of the ground, just the right sweet spot in this sort of area. And the council decided what we did, we preserved the wood, and it was because it was under the footpath outside of this cafe on a popular part of Fremantle, and they replaced that section of the pavement with perspex. So you walk along the footpath, you can actually look down and see this sleeper. Also did a job on Rottnest Island, which is a small island off the coast of Western Australia, very popular for tourism, and in particular, don't know what you call it in the States. Here, when kids have finished high school for the year in the last 2 years of senior high, they have a week which is called schoolies. And it's kids just go out, get drunk, take drugs, and obliterate themselves. And Rottnest, because it's a small island, which is essentially all beach around the edges, it's a very popular place to just go and get smashed away from mainstream. But the campgrounds there has a very dark history. And this would have been about 2005. And it was one of those aha moments in life. When you look at history, you're talking 50 years, 100, 200, 500, 1,000, 5,000, 10,000. It's a very mathematical, analytical process. As soon as you start counting in numbers, there's this shift in your brain. You become a robot, become a calculator, right? takes emotion out of it. Well, I was working with this elder. He was in his 50s at the time, an Indigenous elder, custodian of that part of the land. And he told me some stories that his grandmother told him when he was a boy. And get this, his grandmother was alive at the time of first contact with the British, with the colonial empire of the time. You can't get that anywhere else in the world. You know, whether it's the conquistadors in Mexico, in South America, and everything that happened then is in history. Who can you talk to? We can get verification. Well, you know, putting things into perspective, when you realise that's just 3 generations ago.
Yeah, that's insane.
Yeah. His grandmother was there. And I'll tell you, man, their story, their history is so different to what we get taught in school. So different. It was not a peaceful handshaking here. Here's some pearls. Thank you. Here's some land. Nothing like that. It was a massacre. It was just massacres up the massacres. And the first ships that arrived were not settlers. They were British soldiers. So they came here knowing what was here, and they came here to take the land for settlers. In Australia.
To the rest of the world, at least to North America, what we're told about Australia is the criminals being sent from the British Empire were the settlers. Is that does that align with your experience there?
Well, yeah, convicts, but still a lot, mostly the Irish, steal a loaf of bread or something, okay, send him to Australia. Because the conditions were so hard, so harsh, they were not expecting a high survival rate. It's like better just to kill off some convicts while they prepare the farmland for the people to come. And I guess in essence with that, if you're sending a lot of convicts, you're going to need a lot of soldiers to go with them. So I guess that's like a bridge between, but there were actual settlers that came for an opportunity to, get some free land and start a new life. But
yeah, I guess that makes a lot of sense. Like, send down the convicts to help with the process of terraforming the island, as it were. But
yes.
that it's actually like, yeah, no, again, like, if I had spent more time and actually thought about it, then I probably would have come to a similar conclusion as that. But not having actually been there or lived any of it is not necessarily part of my worldview. So I hadn't spent that long about it, and yeah, no, it makes a whole hell of a lot of sense. And yeah, seriously, fuck the British Empire and all of the atrocities and genocides that they have committed around the world, and basically set the stage for where we are now, and then the continuing atrocities of government in general.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, rule number 1: the government is not your friend. That's like the first thing you've got to come to terms with if you want to start working out what's going on in the world. What's really happening. Number 1, the government is not your friend.
Doesn't matter what they're saying, they're lying, and it doesn't matter who is in office, they are not your friend, they're not on your side. And if you are a fan of any politician, then you are drinking the Kool-Aid.
Yes. 100% agree on that. Yeah. But that, I think just the whole, it was like being hit in the head by a piece of 4x2 when I personally had the realization from these stories that he was telling me that that's only 3 generations. Like his grandmother was here. We haven't had that opportunity anywhere else in the world.
Yeah,
which
no,
is
that
puts
that sounds
into
fascinating.
perspective. Yeah. And that puts into perspective in the 150 years of Western Australia why there was such a strong attempt to completely eradicate the Indigenous population. Like, you know, I don't know if you've heard, I know we made a little bit of international scandal of the stolen generation.
No.
No. Well, essentially, the government passed legislation. Oh, look, it's in ink on it's a bit of piece of paper. You have to do what it says. I like Max Egan's take on this. You know, when you're writing, when you're spelling, it's literally a spell. You know, and this is the
Yep.
power that government and police hold. Oh, we've got a piece of paper with ink on it. You have to do what we say. It's a spell, and people are caught in this spell. But they wrote this legislation and they stole all of the children. If a full-blood Aboriginal couple had a child, the child was taken from them by the state, and the child was to be raised by, their missionary schools at the time. So the child would not learn their history, would not learn their language, would not learn their culture. And at the time in the settlement of Australia, the term when the British planted their flag, it was terra nullius, was their claim on Australia, from Latin meaning, look, this land's here and no one's using it, so we're going to take it. At the time, there were thousands of countries within Australia. So Australia is a continent, just like Europe. It's a continent with lots of countries. Australia was the same, and the peoples. If you talk to an Indigenous person here today who knows their history, and they'll say, I'm from this country or I'm from that country. They don't say Australia. I'm from Noongar country in the southwest. What we call southwest of Australia is Noongar country for them. They say, I'm from Noongar country. Each country had its own trade agreements, its own languages, its own borders.
Yeah, similar to the tribes of the natives here in the States, I would imagine.
Exactly.
And honestly, that makes so much more sense than Australia just being a country, just because the population is small due to the vast majority of the interior being uninhabitable. Like it's still that there's significant separation between the peoples, and it makes more sense to have a more localized governance structure. Like
Yeah.
China, the US are honestly too big as countries. Like the US kind of manages to almost work because it's divided into 50 states, which are held roughly equal with the federal government in a lot of ways. And I do think that that particular aspect of the founding of this country was a pretty genius stroke. There's a few things that they did really right, and I think that was one of them. But it's kind of like the concept of one world government. It's not gonna fucking work because people are different. Like I don't think that it's right to necessarily divide people based on whatever factor you feel like coming up with, because people are people, and yet because of those differences based on geolocalities and just different cultures, there's always going to be those
Different needs.
borders. It can't work to have somebody in Europe making decisions for South America or Australia or fucking Eastern Asia. Like, it's just not gonna fucking work because you don't understand what these people are going through, how they feel, how they live their daily lives. you're not there, you don't know, it's just not going to work.
Yeah, that's why I'm a huge fan of decentralization, not just in crypto, but in any aspect of life. Um, I've never seen a successful, um, what's the word, manifest that has come to be. Like when you look at the foundational of whether it's democracy, communism, socialism, they all look great on paperwork, but we've never had an actual example of either of them.
Exactly. We've
Yeah,
also never had an example of a government that works. Every single
yes,
one of them
exactly.
has its own failings, and there are better and worse in certain aspects, and each of them have their own strengths and weaknesses. But we've never seen a government that actually works. They all eventually crumble. They all eventually turn to crushing the very people that they're supposed to be supporting and taking care of and protecting. And I honestly, I'll be the first to admit that I don't know how to fix this problem. Like I
Yeah,
don't see a way to set it up so that that doesn't like that is not the inevitable conclusion.
yeah. And government by nature is cancerous. It feeds off of its host, and the bigger government gets, the faster it eats its host. So that's one way, I guess, you can look at government.
And yet, because humanity is humanity, no government is also not going to work because it's going to naturally just evolve into tyranny of the strong, and the strongest and the greediest. The
Yeah,
same as with structured government, it's like I've been saying for quite a while. Like there's never been a good president. In order to even be
yeah,
considered for the job, you have to be a world-class piece of shit.
yeah.
Because you have to be
I believe
interested in the
that,
job. I don't want to rule over
yeah,
anybody else.
yeah. Anarchy could work at some point in the future, or may have worked at some point in the past, but there's so many points to get to before that can happen. Whereas now we are so divided in so many ways that anarchy could not work right now. Just what two different people's views, opinions, and ideas are so opposite that they cannot live side by side without a third party negotiator or mediator, um,
Yeah.
or some sort of rules where it's okay to sacrifice my baby for a crop this year, and the neighbours no, life is precious. Um, like just using one example of an extreme of division, we are now globally so divided in so many ways, by governments, by ideologies, by religions, by philosophies. Some would say on purpose, divide and conquer. That
I'm in
we've
that
been
camp.
brought to the point where anarchy is not an option right now. So it's like the only option we have right now is government. And the main reason we need government is to protect us from other people's governments, not from other people. It's like we need a government to protect us from your government, the
Yeah.
people themselves. Um, there's a friend of mine here in Melbourne, also from the hip hop scene. He has an expression that he covered. It's people killing people to protect people from people. It just totally sums up what's going on in the world.
Yeah. Yeah, and people trying to impose their values on other people. Like that's
Yes.
I think the
Yeah.
real crux of
It's
it.
like fuck off and leave me alone. But no, you must do it my way.
Exactly. That's the crux of the problem. That's why we have people killing people because
Yes.
And no matter what, there's always going to be disagreements. There, you're never going to know or meet or find anybody that you always 100% agree with, because we are all unique beings. We all have our own thought processes, but there are ways to settle things amicably or not settle things amicably. Like, you can always agree to disagree, but people don't want to do that now. In general, like, obviously not speaking on a person to person level, but just, in aggregate, nobody wants to accept a possibility that there could be more to a given situation than what they want to acknowledge. And it's disgusting, and it's causing so much heartache and misery in throughout this world. And yeah, that I think is the main problem that we've got to figure out as a species in order to have a chance to continue as a species.
Yeah. I think some of the most heated debates, arguments, and so forth have been over the perspective where someone has just the tiniest little piece of the picture. It's like in a painting, like the background, this Discord thing behind me. Someone is living in the pixel of that one of those coconuts. All they can see is coconut. Someone's living in the leaves. Someone's living on the sand. Someone's living in the water. But one person's life is brown, another person's life is green, another person's life is blue. But you got to pull back and look at it. It actually all fits together. It's a beautiful landscape. But they're just so divided between green, brown, blue. It's like they cannot understand.
It's a great allegory, or not. It's a great example of the allegory of the cave. Like
Plato's cave, yeah, absolutely.
We're still stuck in the same spot, and I mean, Plato was how fucking long ago? Fucking 1500, 1600
600
years ago.
Yeah.
And we're still stuck in the same problems that he was trying to tell us how to avoid and get out of. Like where is this supposed evolution as a species? Like, why did we stop improving ourselves and just start trying to improve others? Like, I think that's a big part of it is we've made things easy enough in terms of base survival for ourselves as a species that we have started inventing more problems for ourselves as a species and as individuals. And it's
Yeah.
crazy. Like, and it's been going on so long. It's like, this is a system that we were born into. It's falling on us to fix it, although we had nothing to do with its creation. We have never known anything else. And so, like, how in the hell are we supposed to figure out how to fix it when we're stuck in that cave? And I don't know, but yeah, I at least am trying to be one of the people that's pointing out that, hey, that's not a person, that's a shadow. Like, that's that's not the truth of what's going on. Just because I don't have all of the answers doesn't mean that what you're looking at is the truth.
Yeah.
And it's difficult. And I feel like there needs to be more of that, and yet at the same time, that's not going to fix the problem either. Like, that's just, it's a step. It's not the solution.
And another side part of the cave too is not usually presented within the story, but when you like literally like look at it in perspective, all you're seeing is black and white on this shadow show. You're not seeing any of the colors involved that are projecting this shadow onto the wall. And when you look at our society has become more and more dichotomous. There's only two options when you want to do something. Whether it's day, night, up, down, left, right. We've become extremely dichotomous in all areas of society. And to not have an extreme standpoint, so to not be left or right, Republican or Democrat, conservative or Labour or Liberal, there's no grey area in between.
Exactly.
But the grey area is where everything happens. Like the entire colour spectrum exists between those 2 points, but you have to choose here or here. And this is why some people become so rigid and inflexible in areas of ideology. And art, craft, creativity, this all exists in between these 2 points, but we're supposed to take a stance on one of these 2 points. And if I'm right and you disagree with me, then you must be wrong. There's nowhere in between, and people just get stuck in that. And not well, in all cases the truth is somewhere in between. But when you take those 2 points, if I'm right, which of course I am, and you disagree with me, well, you must be wrong. And that is the bastion of so many ideological arguments, that it's laughable when you can see the colour spectrum. But when you're in either the black or the white, you can't see that.
No, and yeah, as you kind of mentioned earlier, and it's compounded by the fact that the powers that be, those who are interested in having control over others, have a vested interest in keeping that control, and the best way for them to do so is to drive people into the black and the white, and to divide and conquer, to segregate and destroy, and to perpetuate that cycle. And now I don't see how the machine gets broken down. Like, Big Brother is watching. Like, it's happening. We're living through it. There are various degrees based on places and whatnot, and there are places where things are better and places where things are worse, but we're all on the same wheel, and it's disheartening.
Yeah.
Truly.
And even from that perspective, like you mentioned before, that you've never seen an example where government works. Maybe another way to express that is never seen an example where government lasts, because I think government does work. It's working perfectly.
You're right. It's
what you
as
think
intended.
it's supposed to be doing is not
government.
what they're actually doing.
Yeah, no, that very well played. Point scored for Bob.
Yeah, the system's broken. No, the system's working perfectly. You just don't know what the system is. Yeah, and it's inversion. It's the complete mirror image. We're living in the reflection. We are not the actors in the sunlight. We are the shadow puppets. Like, everything is inverted, whether it's education, the health system, spirituality, what's another bastion? Financial system, the health, they all do the complete opposite. Now, the health system is to keep you sick so they can sell you drugs and make money. The education system is to keep you dumb. The financial system is to keep you broke. Like, they all do the opposite of what they claim to do. So,
absolutely, and thank you for bringing that up as well, because I feel like that there are definitely people out there that need to hear these types of things because they're not realizing how trapped we all are, and that it's not a left and right thing. It's not, such and such person is your end. It's not like a Republican or Democrat thing. It's a human thing. It's we are all in this together. We're all in the same ship, and it is sinking. And it's either start helping to grab a bucket and start bailing the shit out, or we're all going down together. Like it is only through concerted effort that we can affect any kind of change, and without any kind of change, we're all gonna die. And of course, we're all
Yeah.
gonna die anyways. Death is an inevitable part of life. But like as a species, I do very much worry for the future of humanity. And in many ways, like I don't know whether it's going to be Mother Earth finally deciding she's had enough of our shit, and she takes care of us through weather.
Like a dog, eventually, when there's too many fleas, it just gives itself a good shake and all the fleas go flying.
Yeah, exactly. And like I don't know whether Australia is going to decide to weaponize all of their spiders against the rest of us or anything like that. I don't know whether it's going to be aliens coming in, or whether we're going to outright destroy ourselves with a nuclear winter or whatnot. But I know there's something coming. Like, I can't put my finger on what it's going to be because there's so many fucking possibilities. It's just a question of which one happens first. But like, we're on our way out as a species, and it may or may not be too late to change that. Like, that's my fear, is that it might already be too late. Like, we might not be able to save anything at this point. We might just be, living out the last days as the Titanic's already broken in half, and we're on the fucking end that is, vertically up in the air.
Yeah. I think the controlled demolition is the function of government. When things happen too fast, too quickly, then you have revolution. Then people start to take notice. You want people to be in that semi-conscious lullaby fluoride state where things can be annoying. I love the analogy of the dog on the nail. There's two old timers sitting out on the porch, rocking back and forth, smoking, drinking their bourbon, and the dog on the porch just keeps whining, just continuously. And then this guy says to his mate, he says, "Why is your dog just whinging and whining?" And he says, "Oh, he's lying on a nail." And he says, "Oh, well, why doesn't he just get up and move?" He says, "Oh, it doesn't hurt that much." And that's the state that government likes to keep us in. And if you have any doubt whatsoever that the system is designed to fail, all you have to do is look at the financial system.
Right.
Our currency, our fiat currency. When every single dollar in circulation is simply the principal of a loan, how can you pay that back with interest? It's impossible without robbing the resources to convert to currency. But eventually they're going to run out. So the whole function of government is the controlled demolition. And to use your analogy of the sinking ship, it's like, there's holes in the ship. So the government say, okay, let's get a damage control party together. Let's form a committee. Let's look at this. How many holes do we have? Which hole is taking in the most water? Let's form committees and look into this. And then for the news coverage, they'll send everyone to one compartment of the ship and go, look, we're fixing it. Whereas, and all the other compartments, the government are there with drilling more holes into the ship. But it's a controlled demolition. They've just got to be. Again, the boiling frog analogy is a perfect example. You can't go too fast. There's a limit to what people will accept. You just got to kill them slowly, and not, without raising too many alarms. Because when people get alarmed, that's revolution time. So yeah, government is just the controlled. That the system is designed to fail, and their job is just to manage that demolition.
100%. And honestly, like I'd never heard the dog on the nail analogy before. I like that a lot. That was very, very poignant, and I feel like that is exactly where we're at. Like, yeah, there is a misdirection and sabotage and controlled demolition. That's exactly and yeah. When the alarms are raised, that's when revolutions happen, and that's exactly what I feel needs to be going on. Like, alarm bells should be ringing in every single person's mind, and there's just so much, and they've gotten so good at the misinformation and the misdirection that
which makes you wonder how many times has it happened already. They're so good at it.
Yeah, exactly, and just every time they just keep getting better, and it's like the only problem is, okay, let's say, best case scenario, the entire world woke up and we did have full-scale revolutions. What then? Then we just have new people making a new government that follows the same fucking cycles because we don't know anything else.
That's what's called revolution.
Exactly. And it's revolting.
Yes. Yes. So what we really need is rebellion, not revolution.
Yes. And I mean, we don't have a General Leia Organa, so who's going to be the one to lead it? Like, and again, how much can we trust that person? Because the person that wants to be the leader is the one who is least equipped to lead.
Yeah, history just resounds with that. Yeah. So it's got to come down to community-based decentralization, where the person who's making the decisions is in the same situation as the person being affected by the decisions, which is the complete opposite of centralization.
Yeah.
And at a community, I mean, if you're living in a community, let's go back to like classic hunter-gatherer style. Like before the arrival of British in Australia, Indigenous peoples were here. Actually, I will digress a little bit here just to give you an example of how history works. So still in textbooks today, we teach that Indigenous Australians were here for 40,000 years before the British arrival. So, 40,000 years of history. The only reason that figure exists is because it was originally the extreme end of carbon dating, C14 radiocarbon dating. You cannot date something with the half-life cycle breakdown. 40,000 years is maximum. So because that's all that they can test for, they said, no. I mean, the Aboriginal peoples here, they'll tell you they've been here forever. But history teaches they've been here for 40,000 years because that's as far as you can date. Now, with the invention of AMS, or advanced mass spectrometry, it's essentially a machine that measures in real time the decay of the radioactive isotope, the C14, as it's trying to get back to its original state of C12. It measures it in real time, so it's a more accurate way of dating. And it pushes dating back to 48,000 years. And so they retested some artifacts and got those dates, 48,000 years. Did they change the history books, the textbooks? No. And back in the 90s, an American anthropologist called Alan Thorne came up with a dating system called thermoluminescent dating, and it's quartz-based. A lot of our sand here in Australia is quartz, very, very high quartz content, which is why we have such beautiful beaches, the yellow and white sand. And the thing with quartz, it stores heat and light. So while quartz is in the open, sunlight, it's like a battery constantly being fully charged. You take that out of the sunlight into darkness, and the charge starts to decrease at a known rate. So in stratigraphic layering, with carbon dating, of course, you can only date organic matter. So you find stone artifacts or something, they cannot be dated. And if you do find a stone artifact, you're hoping that maybe in that same stratigraphic layer, you might have a bit of, a bit of coal from a fire or some organic matter. Likewise with the quartz. So if you have something that cannot be a stone artifact, stone tool, because the indigenous peoples were using a Stone Age technology at the time. So if you have a stone artifact in a particular stratigraphic layer that hasn't been recently exposed to sunlight, because as soon as you re-expose it to sunlight, boom, it's fully charged again. Right? Yeah. So in a controlled environment of excavation, you can see how long ago it was that piece of quartz last saw sunlight. And a lot of, it's still in the experimental phase, I guess, because there's a lot of opportunity for contamination. But in some cases where, like in rock caves, shelters and things where it's, well known geologically this area has not seen sunlight, retesting of it, they came up with dates of 72,000 years. Now, in the Darwinian theory of evolution, they postulate Homo sapiens sapien, which is modern anatomical man, like we are. You might see the occasional exception walking down the street, but all in all, we're Homo sapiens sapien. They postulate anything from conservatively 80,000 to 120,000 years is the period where we start first appearing in the archaeological record. Then you go back from there, Neanderthals, which they're also giving classification of Homo neanderthalensis, Homo erectus, Homo habilis, Australopithecus afarensis back into Olduvai Gorge in Africa. All of that theory relies on this certain movement of peoples across times and space. And the Aboriginal people being here for 72,000 just blows that completely to pieces, obliterates that theory. So it's there's so much about the Indigenous history here in Australia that just goes against our mainstream theory, which is going right back to a point earlier I was saying there was a huge part in the movement of the government to obliterate Indigenous culture, like the stolen generation. So people grew up not knowing their history, not knowing their language, not knowing their culture. And so now, because it's only 3 generations, that was not lost, and the peoples are trying to regather their cultural heritage history. So that's a good thing. But I've completely fallen off the rails. Rick, where was I?
You were regaling us with scientific theory and the growth of how we are able to expand upon our knowledge, and it's amazing the things that we are able to figure out scientifically and how we are able to continue to expound upon that knowledge. And it's also amazing the reticence of the powers that be and the average person to be willing to update that information as we learn more, because yeah, we can tell all of these things, and yet there are always going to be limits to what we're able to tell that we will be able to expand upon at a later date as we figure more shit out. And it's a continuously ongoing process figuring out how we got to where we are, because just like, the James Webb Telescope versus the Hubble Telescope, like, we can see so much more of what is out there in the cosmos now, that we have so much more data to be able to work with to figure things out. We're able to answer questions now that we wouldn't have even been able to think of 10 years ago, because we didn't know what we needed to know to formulate the question to ask. And like, that is the kind of shit that does give me hope for humanity, because when we put our minds to it, we are an amazing fucking species at figuring shit out, solving problems, learning, adapting, overcoming. Like, that is a amazingly powerful trait
Fulcrum.
that we have as a species, but it's not being fucking used enough.
Yeah. I think the essence in what you just said then lies in the formulation of the question. That's where everything starts and begins. Answers can be a dime a dozen. If if you're not asking the right questions and going a step backwards, like,
Douglas
how
Adams
do you
was
even
onto
know
something.
which question to ask?
42.
And exactly,
Like,
it's Douglas Adams was a genius, man. There's so much encoded in those books
oh yeah,
beyond the classic catchphrases.
yeah, like,
Absolutely. And
so
he was
deep.
in the club.
And
Douglas Adams was in the club.
yeah,
So those guys like to.
crap, I think we might have lost you. I hope not. We have seen a couple of skips, but this is definitely the longest of them. Welcome back.
What happened?
We lost you for a minute. I had noticed a couple of skips earlier where like you glitched out for a second or two and then came right back. It's honestly fairly common when I've got somebody on from halfway around the world. I've had guests from India and Germany and whatnot before, and I mean, as great and wonderful of a tool as the internet is, it's not without its limitations either. But
For sure. Yeah.
so we lost you mid-sentence there, unfortunately.
Which sentence? Formulating the question.
Yes. Yeah. We were talking about Douglas Adams was in the club, and formulating the question is the most important thing. And then that was when I lost you, and it was probably for like maybe a minute or two.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, and you said it before that, like, to be able, the response, the answer, the action, the direction you take is all a consequence of the question that you ask. And where you are consciously is the platform from which you get to ask the question. Like, we can ask questions today that we couldn't have asked 200 years ago. And we could have gone in a completely different direction 200 years ago had we formulated a better question.
True.
So, yeah, like, growth or evolution, or it's not linear. It's definitely spiral.
Sorry, just making some adjustments to the video on the fly.
All right.
There we go. Now I got you back to where you actually fit within the screen.
Okay.
When it reconnected, it like blew you up to like 3 times the size, and I'm like, what the heck is going on here? But yeah, no. So, what do you feel is the best question that we can be asking right now?
I think to know where we want to go, we must fully have an understanding of where we came from. And I think this is why history has been so regular, such a controlled environment, especially when you go back into ancient artifacts. There are special institutions incorporated, especially within academia, to prevent leakage of the selected path, like Smithsonian Institute, for example.
Oh no, not again.
Science, there is substantial evidence to back that up. And as soon as anything over, trying to think of feet here, anything greater than 7 feet, like 7 to 12 feet, human beings, anatomical human beings, have been popping up at a regularity you would not believe. But they become the domain of the Smithsonian Institute. Are they on display in a museum somewhere? No, they're in a dark basement for research purposes. And there's examples greater than 12 feet. And there's some amazing, like, if you're not, without going into too much detail, but if you're interested in that subject, you can find a plethora of information on YouTube with images of these things. But controlling the history gives you a false, if you know that you're in the southwest and you want to go to the northeast, you plan your journey based on that. But
Damn it with these cutouts.
you plot a certain direction. But if you're actually in San Francisco and want to go to Colorado and you're using compass points, your destination is going to be very far from what you intended. You must know where you're starting from, and to know that, you must know where you've come from. So I think this is why our history is so regulated. And my personal area of research, probably going back at least 20, 30 years, has been history. Because the more I investigate history, the more I've learned that what we get taught is complete bullshit, complete absolute bullshit. And because of where I am, obviously, and the opportunity I've had to work with Indigenous elders, Australia has been a great proving ground for that. The fact that it wasn't that long ago, and there are still people 3 generations removed from this massive, major historical changing event where histories get rewritten. Now there are still a 3rd generation removed from that time before history was rewritten. It's a unique opportunity to study that woke me up into any area of research, investigation into history and archaeology, for example. Again, it's part of that controlled field. there's only so far you can go. Now, every advancement in archaeology comes when some professor dies, right? And suddenly people can dispute his work without fear of retribution. But quite often the findings from an archaeological excavation used to support a historical hypothesis does not come about. The archaeology usually contradicts the historical hypothesis it was initially set out to discover. But academia, or like I mentioned before, the institutions that complete opposite and so forth, within society, society's like a set of railway tracks, right? And we're on this journey. We're going along. We're in the rail car, though, right? We don't get to hold a wheel or have anything. That we're on railway tracks. We have no control. We're just in the car. But if you're walking along the railroad tracks, there's the direction they're going, but there's a little bit of bufferway either side of the rails, going to the bluestone before you go into the wilderness, right? So there's a little buffer zone either side of the railway tracks. And it's okay to wander across into these areas. That's okay. But if you go too far in either direction, then they will come for you. You go too far in one direction, they come for you in blue uniforms. You go too far in the other direction, they come for you in white uniforms. But either way, they come for you. There's only so far you can travel in the buffer zones within academia, for sure.
Ridiculously poignant analogy. I lost you a couple of times there, which is very unfortunate because I am super interested in, especially when you were talking about human remains of what we would consider to be abnormal size. As we develop and learn more about our history and how important it is to figure out our actual history, learn the truth, and figure out how we got to where we are in order to know how to get where we want to go. Like great points that you made, and that I wish I had been able to catch all of. I wish that the audience had been able to catch all of, and I'm definitely going to have to look into that. But do you feel like it is possible at this point for us to actually filter out the truth from the lies, to figure out, and obviously 100% is unattainable, but do you think that there is enough room for us to do solid work as far as figuring out our history to where we can turn things around and right the ship, as it were?
That's tough because we through generations and existence, we get programmed, and you can add apps or dApps to the blockchain, right? But there's certain things on the blockchain that cannot be changed. And with each generation, we are like a new generation of blockchain, but there's limits to how far you can change the basic code without completely destroying the program. We can go back, we can reinterpret, but then you got things like cognitive dissonance, and people will literally just melt if something goes beyond what they're capable of comprehending. And then there's the absolute limits of understanding to the point where you literally cannot see it. And this is the power of the mind. The mind is simply a tool, right, that we developed. And again, I always like apparently, because I don't know the truth of anything. Any point that I stand is simply the culmination of experience and learning. But apparently, like, the mind is a tool we developed during the evolutionary process as for survival, a benefit in survival. But our mind is, or as the ego, will not allow itself to be wrong, which is why it's so hard to change or create new habits. Now, you're all, for example, on top of the operating system, just to give an example of a program, you will hear people that say, oh, I'm hopeless at remembering people's names. Oh, I'm always running late. Right. Every time they say that, they're reinforcing that program. Yeah. And you decide, okay, I need to work on being late. It's terrible. It's not working for me. I need to do better. I really want to change that program. I want to work on that. And then you go, oh, I have to leave in 5 minutes for this meeting. Okay. It's time to go, oh, where's my car keys? I can't find my car keys. And they're right in the middle of the coffee table. You're staring right at them, but you cannot see them.
Or they're in your fucking hand.
Yeah, but your mind says, no, you must be late. I keep telling you, I'm always late. I can't allow you to be on time. That will make me wrong. So you literally cannot see your keys, even though you're staring right at them. They've been filtered out. The scotoma, the job of the scotoma, because in our function, the data that comes in through our eyes, because now we actually don't see anything, right? You do not see a single thing. You cannot see me right now. You stand outside, look at a tree, you cannot see that tree. You're receiving photonic energy through your eyes as little light packets. It's converted to an electrical signal, and it's somewhere right at the back of your skull near the medulla. There's this little area that exists in complete darkness that interprets that electrical signals and tells you what you're seeing. So you don't actually see anything. You're being told what you're seeing through interpretation of electrical signals. So if your mind wants you to see or hear something totally different to justify its existence, the mind wants to survive. Its pure function is survival. That's why it was created as a tool. Your mind wants to survive. If you realize that you don't need your mind, then that's anti-survival for the mind. So the mind cannot let you come to that conclusion. You look at any moment of clarity, the sportsman's sweet shot on the golf swing or baseball or anything like that, absolute moments of clarity, they all happen when you bypass your mind. Intuition, gut feeling, you bypass the mind. These are when we make breakthroughs. But the mind filters us, and the mind also has an operational speed as well. 28 frames a second. 28 times a second, your mind is taking a snapshot and telling you what is. And when you reach the extreme of that, imagine like a strobe light. So if this strobe light is flashing, you can see it flashing right up to 28 times a second. At that point, you can no longer see it flashing. All you see is bright light. This is not a limitation of our eyes. This is the limitation of our mind. So as soon as you reach that speed of 28 frames a second, all you see is white light. So 28 times a second, your mind is telling you what's real by comparing the previous frames linearly. And everything you do takes up your processor speed. It's like you go to the supermarket, oh, I need a tube of toothpaste. You go to the supermarket and there's 28 brands of toothpaste to choose from. 28 things, exactly the same thing, but different. So this is all using up processor speed. And when your mind actually reaches 28 frames a second, it shuts down. Right? But the last thing it does as a survival mechanism, the last thing your mind does before it shuts down, it releases a surge of adrenaline into the body, which gives us that fight or flight. Boom, we got this boost. Oh, okay, fight or flight. Which is it? Because my mind is not helping me anymore. My mind is just shut down. It's just me now. Fight or flight. What do I do? And in a modern day context or environment, say let's take an office environment, workspace type thing. You can't fight your boss. You need that job. You got to pay your bills. At the same time, you can't run away. You need that job. You got to pay your bills. So all of these surges of adrenaline that are not being used, that's stress. And it becomes like, it's because it's crystalline in structure. It starts forming blockages in your energy lines, in your chi, meridian, kai, whatever you want to call it, because this chemical, hormonal chemical, is crystalline in structure. When it solidifies in your system, it literally blocks energy. So where was I going with this, Rick? I get on these tangents and I just get so far down I forgot which path I originally came from.
We were talking about the limitations of the human mind, and I got the impression as you were speaking, it's almost as if the mind is the government of the body.
Yes.
Like it seems like you may or may not have been driving towards that point, but if it wasn't your destination, it was certainly a point of view along the side of the journey.
Well, that's the word government is actually literal definition. And you can look this up just for an aha moment. It is to govern the mind.
Yeah, because mental...
Government. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, that is... and again, obviously, we've both been doing a lot of thought about a lot of things on these lines. This is not the first time that either of us have had conversations.
Not our first rodeo.
Or followed these thought processes. But yeah, there's still new ground to be found in them, and that's why I love doing this and having interesting people like yourself on, because having these conversations is important, because you're going to when you speak to somebody else, then they're going to have a different point of view, and they're going to have different life experiences, and therefore their thought processes are going to be different from yours. And even if you are of a very similar mind, they're going to have taken steps along that path that you have not. And I've definitely picked up quite a few things from you throughout the course of this conversation, and I'm supremely grateful for that, because that's of course going to help me be a better conversationalist in the future, and help me with my own thought journeys as well. And I hope that I have also been able to provide a little bit of alternate viewpoint to you as well. We are coming up on 2 hours now, and I know it's super crazy in the early in the morning for you there. So I'm definitely down to continue this as long as you would like to, but I do want to be respectful of your time and let you get to bed if you want to. So
yeah,
the ball is totally in your court on that note. But yeah, I'm definitely loving this conversation. By no means am I trying to end it prematurely and get rid of you. I just wanted to put that out there. But yeah, I really, I'm wondering, and I think the thing that I keep coming back to is, can we, and this is the question that really started your last
last
journey.
tangent.
Can we actually get to that level of understanding because there are so many lies and so much misinformation with so much strength and credence behind it. There is that layer of cognitive dissonance, as you mentioned. There is also that layer of repression of truth. And then there is the layer of the limits of human competence. And it, like, how do we get to the point where we're certain that we know?
I think if we, again, just for visual purposes, use an analogy of trekking through the wilderness, because even here in the crypto space, we're all pioneers. Like, this is, we're traveling uncharted ground, and so as a species, individually, rise and falls of civilizations. Now, have we done this a million times already? Are we just replaying the exact same simulation? Quite possibly. We don't know, but we can only go on what we think we know. And I think hacking our way through this trail, the brush, the thickets, the surroundings has got so thick and so dense that if we realize we're going in the wrong direction, it's going to be so difficult to make a course correction and start a new path that we're going to have to first backtrack to a certain point. And, like, for example, just basic axioms, things that we accept as fact without questioning, these are in our base code at this point. So if you're making a mathematical calculation and one of the essential formulas is incorrect, you're never going to get the right answer. And, we're put into this indoctrination, some say education system, at such a young, impressionable age that we are given certain information that we accept as factual. Once we accept something as an axiom, when later on, like say for example, I have some false data that I received at primary school, but I accepted then as an axiom, when I'm making a calculation now, that is part of my base code. So it is not part of the analytical process that's going on. It is assumed as foundational bottom line code, so is not being analyzed itself. So I'm making assumptions based on facts that are wrong. So we literally have to go backwards to a point, and whether there's various forms of doing this, breaking down engrams, or hypnotism and things like that, none of which I'm a fan of, because you can dangerously destroy the code. We have to ourselves go back to a point where we recognize an inconsistency in the code, and we must correct that code. Now, if we can correct a code, like a false piece of data we learnt at the age of 10, and you go back like any dev analyzing his code, and you recognize the error and you fix that. You go, all of this assumptions that I've been making since the age of 10 based on this one piece of information that is false, when you change that, suddenly all of your past, depending on your age, 10, 20, 30, 40 years, your perspective on so many things has now been broadened, corrected, and changed. You look at the same thing and you see it in a completely different world. It's like that someone has, like in the Matrix, someone has changed the external world, but nothing has changed other than your perception of that, your interpretation of these electrical signals, because you've corrected an error in the code. So going back to what we think we see is simply interpretation of electrical signals. What we see is 100% internal, but we're through the government wanting to give you their software package to download and install. As long as you're running that program, you're never going to do that. So you really need to start with antivirus software, with debugging programs, and the way to do that is to start questioning. Take some basic fundamentals that you would initially think are crazy to question, and start questioning it, and rather than accepting it simply because when you were 10 years old, your teacher told you that this was true, look at it yourself. Start finding, genuinely question everything, going backwards, fixing the code, and answers will become obvious to you because you're now interpreting these signals differently. So when you look at the external world, when everything that you're seeing out there is the past. The moment that you see something, it has become the past. So if you want to change your environment, you look at this building, you think, oh, that building's ugly, I don't want that building, I want to park there. Okay, you send out all of these bulldozers and you go through the whole process, knock down the building, plant this. What a time-consuming thing to do. Whereas if you could not have that building to begin with, so programming what you want before it becomes out there, I believe is our real true power. But we've been convinced that we need to run around out there in the past trying to fix or change something that's already in the past. Our true power as a co-creator is to change the future before it becomes the past. But we're so trapped running around in these programs of running around in the past trying to alter what's already there rather than create what is not there yet. But to reach that state, that beingness, we first need to start debugging our own code that has been holding us back longer than we know. I hope that made sense and I didn't go too deep. It
made perfect sense, and actually it was very funny how you mentioned antivirus software, because that was exactly what was running through my mind at that exact moment. And it also ties in with your earlier point about the things that we hold as axiomatic truths, because even the antivirus software is one of those kind of lies that has been marketed to us, because the way that antivirus software works is basically it's a virus that acts exactly as a virus does and takes up all of the resources that a virus wants to take up, so that a virus can't get in and start fucking your shit up because it's already outcompeted by something that you put there. And yeah, that's exactly how that indoctrination is affecting us and is working within our minds. And I mean, I'm not saying that education is necessarily a bad thing, because being uneducated is even worse. But it does come down to question everything. But why? Like, you cannot just accept things by rote, and you cannot just accept things at face value, because everything has another layer to it. Everything has an ulterior motive to it. and everything has an element of disingenuity to it, whether that is intentional or just representational. Like, I've said for a long time, like with the JFK assassination, I don't know what the truth is. Here's what I do know: what we were told is a lie, and we will never know the truth. Like, even if there were to
And
be
if you
some...
did, how would you know that it is the truth?
Exactly. But like, because even if there were some kind of congressional hearing committee, whatever, to release everything that the government knows, there's going to be conflicts within that, because there's going to be information coming from different sources that both have different viewpoints and therefore do not exactly agree on what happened. And so it's always going to come down to an aggregation of the data and how you represent that to yourself within your own mind, much like you were talking about how our eyes don't see, they just transmit electrical signals, and it's our mind's representation of that that tells us what we see. That is the exact same process that happens with any thought that we have, any conclusions that we make, and any of our other senses as well. You don't really taste, you don't really feel. These are all representations that are made within your mind, and I was so glad that you brought that up and put it into such a concise little package, because like I agreed with and I was following you, and I've had most of those thoughts before, but I could not have spoken it so eloquently.
Yeah, thanks for that. And when you look at that foundational problem, because I run into that conundrum with history all the time, you know, exactly like you said with JFK, I don't know what the truth is, but I know that what I'm reading is bullshit. I know there's complete gnosis. I know this is bullshit, but that doesn't automatically tell you what is real or what is truth. And in that interpretation, when that whole process is going on, data coming in, analyzing electrical signals, interpretation, the only tool available to interpret that is the data on your hard drive. And as you mentioned right back at the beginning, we're all unique individuals. So although we have a lot of similar data on our hard drives, you've got data on your hard drive that I do not have on mine. I have data on my hard drive that you do not have on yours, because that data is accumulated through life experiences, the things that have happened to us from life. So when we're interpreting, we've only got the data available on our hard drive to do that with, until we can connect into the etheric internet, the real internet, the etheric internet, that the collective consciousness, whatever you want to call it, the thing that our internet, technical internet, is mimicking. Once we can, crack the password and start using that, then all bets are off. Like, you're to answer your original question, like, can we can change everything, just like the internet changed everything on people waking up. No longer were we limited to magazines, to TV documentaries, to books. But we had access, we could share information directly with each other on the other side of the planet. Channel 9 News is telling me what's going on in the Ukraine and Russia right now. But on my social media platforms, I've got friends in the Ukraine and I've got friends in Russia. I can talk with both of them. I can get what's actually happening. When we can crack the etheric internet, so that when I'm interpreting the electrical signals, I'm no longer restricted to just what's on my own hard drive, that's when it's game over for any form of fat controller out there.
And I like that idea, and yet at the same time, that was
Scary
exactly how we felt about the internet at the advent of the internet. Because I am old enough to remember a time before the internet, barely, but I do remember when it was a new thing, and I remember when it was coming out, and I remember all the hype around it, and then look at what we have, look at what it has turned into. And if we were able to access some kind of hive mind, collective consciousness, etheric internet, I feel like these are all similar concepts.
Yeah, and then once we're savvy in that new environment, do we then discover something beyond that again? Like there's the never-ending story journey.
How do we prevent the perversion of it, like we have seen from the, because yeah, at the advent of the internet, yes, this is a world-changing, amazing tool that has the potential to make every single human being's life better. AI, same thing. This is a world-changing, game-breaking tool that has the potential to make every single human being's life better. And yet, the powers that be do not want that to happen, and therefore, being in control already, have the position and have the leverage to be able to pervert these amazing tools to their own ends and use them to cause more division, more suffering, and more control over the masses.
And I think that's actually like as a resounding wave to ripple out into the cosmos. That's probably a great place to wrap this up, Rick.
All righty. Well, thank you so very much for joining, and go ahead and let the people know where they can find you to get some more resounding wisdom. And you know, I'll give you a couple of moments to, you know, whatever you would like to wrap up on, and whatnot, and then when we go ahead and disconnect, send me your links, and I'll make sure that I post those with the video as well, so that everybody can follow you as well, and anybody who is out there in the audience. Obviously, this man is full of wisdom, and I cannot hope to encapsulate it within a short 2-hour window. So make sure you go follow him and check out his stuff, because great guy, and thank you so much for joining us as well.
Thanks for having me on, Rick, and giving me the opportunity. And you know, it takes, you know, for me to be able to have talked about the things that I've talked about, it takes an attraction, a magnetic, electrical, like, you know, the conversation, the things I've just talked about, I couldn't have had them without you on the, like, to have that with. You know, like, you know, talking to Joe Lunchbox in the office, you can never have that kind of conversation. You know what I mean? So it's likewise, it's mutual. The fact, you know, it takes someone like you for me to be able to talk about the things that I've talked about. So I thank you for that as well. And my name, as it appears on here, as you know, is Bobaphet. You know, sounds like, you know, Star Wars Boba Fett, but because the name came from the hip hop environment, it's PH instead of F, like fat, PH. So Boba Fett with the PH. Find me on the Hive blockchain. I'm not on socials. I quit Facebook, Instagram, all that shit years ago. And I do have an account on Twitter as Boba Fett, and I am on YouTube, but those two things simply mirror my blockchain event. So whatever I post on the Hive blockchain, I put the same content onto YouTube, and I will put a link into Twitter, but I'm not actually active on any of those centralized, controlled, censored environments.
Alrighty. Well,
if you've ever watched my weekly podcast, Splinterlands 101, I started off the same way. My intro for all my episodes: yo, my sovereigns, what up? This is Bobaphet, uncensored on the internet. and that's how I like it to be. So when censorship becomes a thing on a platform, like when I first on the Steam and Hive, I was actually on DTube, and I was talking. My video content at the time was very similar to the conversations we're having today, and that couldn't censor me, but the devs and some people were giving me some serious downvotes, which just meant that you couldn't find me. I was like grayed out in the type things. So Three Speak came along, and Three Speak was very, very receptive to alternative points of view and were very encouraging. So yeah, I'm Free Speak as a DApp on the Hive blockchain. Shout out to them, they're great. So I make all of my videos on ThreeSpeak, which are then posted onto the Hive blockchain, mirrored on YouTube and Twitter. There we go. How's that, Rick?
Perfect. And yeah, I actually just started messing with ThreeSpeak myself, and it's funny you mentioned the downvote blacklisting, because my main account on the mountain is on one of those blacklists, and I've stopped posting there, and I've created new Hive accounts for posting, because every single post that I made was just getting automatically downvoted. And yeah, it's and the censorship also kind of rings particularly hard with me this week. But that's something that we can get into off stream. And meanwhile, for those who are in the audience, thank you so much for joining us. As always, I've been Rick. You've been on the mountain. It has been a wonderful time, and look forward to seeing you again soon.